Good evening. I'm Cantor Evan Kent. 12 years ago, I made Aliyah to Tel Aviv, to Jerusalem, then to Tel Aviv. For 25 years, I was the cantor at Temple Isaiah in Los Angeles, and now I serve a congregation in Milan, Italy, where I am now. On October 7th, I wasn't in Israel. On October 7th, I had just landed in New York at JFK and was helping to take care of my 86-year-old mother, who recently had had surgery and was in a rehabilitation center. My brother, sister, and I were taking care of my mom. My husband was in our apartment in Tel Aviv, and I received a barrage of texts and expletives about the constant din of air raid sirens and how he was in our safe room with our 2 cats. On the morning of October 8th, exactly a year ago, I was in my mother's room in the convalescent home. And a nurse came in to take my mother's blood pressure, temperature, and give her the morning medication. My mother and I were glued watching CNN, and the nurse said to me, she said, "Are you Jewish?" "Yes," I replied, I'm Jewish and I'm Israeli. The 3 of us watched the television in silence, with video of missiles in Iron Dome and reports of thousands dead, communities burned and destroyed. And at that moment, the depth and horror of October 7th was really unknown to us. The nurse broke the silence and she pointed to the television screen and she said, "Now we know. Now we know all the truth. Now we all know the truth." And as she left the room, she turned to me, she said, "May God bless you, and may God bless Israel." Like so many nameless characters in the Tanakh, this early morning nurse was like an angel, an apparition. I never saw her again, and I never got her name. But I want to ask her, what do we know? Do we know the immense torture and pain so many went through on that morning? Do we know, can we even comprehend the horrors the hostages endured and as of today are still enduring in the underground maze of tunnels in Gaza? Do we know how our Israeli leaders failed us? Do we know how they failed us in our most dire hour of need? Do we know how the military was caught unprepared and unaware? Do we know the stories of incomparable heroism? Do we know the stories of uncompromised bravery? And do we know how many voices have stayed silent? Do we know how many voices were not only silent, but didn't believe eyewitnesses to the horrors of October 7th? Do we know how many voices and fists were raised in jubilation over the mass slaughter of Jews? Do we know how American colleges and universities became new epicenters of anti-Zionism and anti-Judaism? Do we know the hundreds of beautiful voices joining together in song and prayer each Saturday night for Havdalah and Kikar Chatufim, praying and pleading for the safety and release of the hostages? Do we know the feelings of cynicism and sadness, powerless and anger that have overtaken the Israeli population? Do we know that for every week, now for a year, we Israelis protest on Kaplan Street in Tel Aviv for return of the hostages, a ceasefire, an end to the bloodshed and the escalation of the war? Do we know? Did that nurse with a blood pressure monitor know? Did that angel in white early in the morning in a convalescent home on Long Island know that a year later, Israel would still be fighting for its existence? Did she know? Could she have known? So I'm waiting. I'm waiting during these Yamin Noraim, these 10 days of awe, for another angel. Another angel to tell me that she knows that there will be an end to the bloodshed, that those 2 little red-headed boys will be returned to their families, and that all the hostages will be returned to the arms of their loved ones. And we, as a nation, as a community, can begin to heal. And does she know when we can finally take down the hostage posters lining the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and Haifa and Ashkelon and Sderot and New York and Beverly Hills? And does an angel know that Israel will exist? Israel will thrive in spite of those who would try to harm us? And does she know that hopefully brave leaders will emerge somehow and someday? And that hopefully these brave new leaders will again help us to turn Simchat Torah into a day of dancing rather than mourning. So during these days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, I'm waiting earnestly for that angel to appear.
Thank you, Cantor Evan Kent, for that beautiful reflection and giving us, some hope also during this very dark and difficult time. My name is Adina Vogel Ayalon, and I am J Street's Vice President and Chief of Staff. I am honored to be moderating this conversation today on behalf of J Street and also the Progressive Israel Network. The Progressive Israel Network brings together 12 organizations representing Americans who are committed to pursuing democracy, equality, and peace in Israel. Our collective webinar today marks 1 year since October 7th. As a community, we want to honor the victims of the horrific Hamas-led terrorist attack and lift up the stories of survivors and those that are still kept in captivity. And we want to explore how Israeli society is coping with the reality of continuous war 1 year later. There are still 101 hostages held in Gaza, and unfortunately, as we see Israel fighting wars on 2 different fronts, there remains uncertainty about a possibility of reaching a ceasefire agreement and a hostage release deal anytime soon. And I also want to note that the J Street Policy Center and the Progressive Israel Network will also be holding a webinar on Thursday, October 10th, about the impact of October 7th on Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, as well as the wider region. Our conversation today will include 2 panels. We are truly fortunate to be joined by incredible individuals and speakers, people who have suffered in unimaginable ways and have continued their leadership and activism, asking tough questions about their elected leaders' policies and actions and the impact of continuing war, not only on Israelis and Israel, but also on Palestinians and the region. And so I will introduce the panelists of the first panel. I'm pleased to introduce Roni Kedar as a friend of our broader movement. She is a resident of Nativ HaSara, a community on the border of Gaza where 21 members of her community were killed on October 7th. Roni is a longtime peace activist who has dedicated her life to trying to raise understanding and promote dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians, particularly Israelis and Palestinians in Gaza, being that those were her neighbors. Amir Tibon is an award-winning diplomatic correspondent for Haaretz and the author of the survivor memoir, The Gates of Gaza, and he is doing several book talks right now, and I encourage everyone to read that book, and of course also follow him in Haaretz. He and his wife and their 2 young daughters are former residents of Kibbutz Nachal Oz, where 15 people were killed and 7 people were taken. Sorry?
Residents.
Residents.
Evacuated residents, but not former residents.
Not former residents.
Okay.
Thank you for the correction.
Okay.
Residents of Kibbutz Nachal Oz, and they are currently living as internal refugees in northern Israel. And Gil Dickman, who is an activist and prominent figure in the movement to bring back the hostages held in Gaza. He is the cousin of Carmel Gat, who was killed in captivity just 1 month ago, and the nephew of Kinneret Gat, who was tragically killed during the Hamas attack on October 7th. Gil has been actively campaigning for the release of the hostages and been highly critical of the Israeli government's approach to the war in Gaza. So thank all 3 of you for being here with us today, but not only that, for your continued leadership over this past year and prior. All of you have been incredible leaders in what we feel is our broader transatlantic movement, even prior to October 7th, and of course, very much afterwards. So thank you so much. I'm going to pose a few questions to each of you. I'll start, Gil, first turning to you. All of us have been following your tireless activism over the past year on behalf of your cousin Carmel and all of the hostages. You have experienced tremendous loss, and it's truly infuriating that we have found ourselves here today without Carmel, and of course without 101 hostages still in captivity. How have you found the strength to be such a leader and outspoken activist?
Well, first, thank you. I want to mention that I'm actually not the only family member of a hostage who was murdered in captivity who stayed inside this important struggle for the lives of the hostages. Merav Svirsky, whose brother Itai Svirsky was also murdered in captivity, and Karmit Palti Katsir, whose brother Elad was murdered in captivity. We can mention Esther Buchstav, and of course, Jonathan Shimris, which you all saw yesterday in the amazing ceremony of the families whose brother was murdered in captivity, actually killed by the IDF just a few months ago. I think we have all found the strength to keep on fighting for the sake of the hostages. First of all, by thinking about our own hostages. I heard from 2 hostages who came back that Carmel, my cousin, was able to be a source of strength for them in captivity. That in the darkest of places, we know that she was aware that her mother was murdered. They went right past the corner where her mother was murdered in Kibbutz Be'eri. She knew that. She didn't know about her father, whether he remained alive or not, or her brother, her sister-in-law, or her niece. And she remained a source of light and of strength for the other hostages, and was trying to do whatever she could to make their life easier there, to actually save their lives there. There are no other words to say it. And she was practicing meditation and yoga with them. When we heard it as her family, it didn't surprise us, but it showed so much about her and her personality. And I think it also symbolizes how we must act for the sake of the other hostages who are still in captivity. We might be going through dark times right now, but we have to keep the hope alive for the sake of the other hostages that are still there. Sometimes we know they hear us, they can hear us over the radio or on TV. Carmel's sister-in-law then was also in captivity. She heard me on the radio once. I know that it's possible. Other hostages also reported that. And they trust us to lead this fight to get them out. And that was correct when Carmel was there. And after she was murdered, in a way, it is even more true, because right now, it is even clearer that the hostages that are there need us to fight for them to get a hostage deal quickly. And when we say now, we don't just mean it because we want them to be here right now and not in captivity, but because we understand that if we don't bring them home now, we might lose them, just like we lost Carmel, just like we lost Elad Katsir and Alon Shimris and Itai Svirsky and many others. 27 hostages who were caught alive, were kidnapped alive, were murdered in captivity or killed in captivity so far. We can't let this happen if we want Israel to remain the state that we love and that we were born to be citizens in. I think it's the most important fight that we have to lead right now. There are so many things to fight for, but the lives of the hostages and the principle that we have to get them home, because it's our obligation as a nation and the government's obligation as a government. It's the most important thing. And for me, it's not over till all the hostages are here.
Thank you, Gil. And I want to stick with you for a moment because, of course, as we are speaking, the international attention and much of the attention here in the United States is really focused on the situation in the north, right? And the escalation potentially with Iran, of course, the war with Hezbollah, and we've also been reading that Netanyahu's approval ratings have been rising in the polls as following the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. And for people who have been very critical of how Netanyahu has been handling this war, and we will dive into that a little bit more. How do you see the possibility of bringing attention back to the fate of the hostages and to the war in Gaza, and to continue to center the fate of the hostages you just spoke about at this time with the broadening war in the north?
Well, I'll start by saying that it's so crucial that we bring back the focus to the hostages, because we know now that for 10 years now, Avera Mengistu, Hisham Sayed, Ron Shaul, and Adar Goldin have been in captivity. The focus was elsewhere, and they remained there. Nobody was doing actually anything to get them out and to get them back home. So it is our mission to keep the focus on the hostages. And I think there is a way to do that, because a hostage deal will not only bring the hostages back, it will also prevent escalation. It might be a broader solution for all the situation that we're in. The way I see it, and when we poll the Israeli public, which we do, because it's important to know what our public thinks, we see that most of the Israelis don't want a never-ending war that just keeps going on and on and on and on. Even the people in Israel who want a complete victory, whatever that means, they imagine a time in which the war is over, the hostages come back. And I think we can start by offering a broader solution for both the North and the South. It'll bring the hostages back and might find a way for us as Israelis to treat other issues that are on the table. And that would have to start with the hostages. When we poll the public, we see most of the people want this, and that over 70% of Israelis would even say that they agree to ending the war in the South and return to getting the hostages back. That's something I think most of the people aren't aware of, because, you know, people think that it's 50-50. 50% of Israelis think it's a good idea, and 50% of Israelis think it's a bad idea. Well, reality is far from that. Most of the Israelis, the large majority of Israelis, want to see this war ending if it means that the hostages are here. And I think that might be our path to solution.
Thank you so much, Gil. Amir, I want to turn to you. And before I turn to you to provide political analysis further to add on also to what Gil just explained to us, I want to go back to your personal story and the story of survival that you wrote about in your book. You really do detail those excruciating events, as well as providing that broader historical and political context and analysis to reflect on the failures that sort of brought us to where we were on October 7th. And also you've continued to write about how we are where we are today. But I would like for you to give us a sense of just, what happened on that day, and then also where is your family a year later, right? You corrected me and you emphasized that you are still residents. So just to give us a sense of, a year, in a summary, a year of where things have taken you since October 7th.
Thank you, Adina. And thank you, Gil and Ronnie, for being here. And it's an honor to share this virtual stage with all of you. Yeah, we are a year after October 7th. And honestly, Adina, if you had told me on October 8th, after my family survived that day, after terrorists fired in our living room, after we had to hide for 10 hours with our 2 young daughters, then 3.5 and 2 years old, in a dark room, and tell them to be quiet because there are dangerous people outside. After 15 of my friends and neighbors in Kibbutz Nachal Ol, community of 450 people. So 15 murdered, that's 3% of the population. Try to imagine a neighborhood, town in the United States losing 3% of their population in one day. After 7 people from our kibbutz were kidnapped into Gaza, and 5 of them were later released in the deal orchestrated by President Biden, for which we would always be grateful to the president. But if you would have told me that a year later, if we had the conversation on October 8th, and you would have told me, Amir, a year from today, the Israeli military would still be fighting in Gaza, and there would still be funerals of soldiers dying there. There would still be 100 hostages held in Gaza, including your 2 friends, my friends Omri Miran and Tzachi Idan, both of them parents of young children who were kidnapped in front of the eyes of their families. And we would be closer, Israel would be closer to an all-out war with Iran than to an agreement that creates a new and better reality without Hamas in Gaza. I would have told you, no way. No way, this is where we will be. A year from today, I would have told you back then, all the hostages will be back home. Hamas will no longer control Gaza. There will be a different government there, maybe some kind of transitionary government supported by important Arab countries like Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia. And Israel would be in a much better place strategically with strong regional alliances, with the full backing of the United States and all of the important Western governments. And if there would have been a need to fight Hezbollah in the north, we would have already been after that, and our people in the north would be back home. And yet none of that has happened. A year later, we meet and we see that there are still hostages there. Just today, there was a funeral of a brave Israeli soldier who died in a battle in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. We are fighting in Lebanon. We are on the verge of a major escalation with Iran. And I think that answers the big question. On the personal level, for my family, we've been evacuated from our home for a year now, together with the rest of the Nahal Oz community. We have been hosted very generously by a kibbutz outside Haifa, Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, a wonderful place, and they have been amazing hosts. I do want to note that up until 2 weeks ago, it was mostly quiet over here, but in the last 2 weeks, this area of Israel has also now entered the range of Hezbollah's rockets. We are kind of used to it. I mean, over here, when there's a siren, you have 1 minute and 20 seconds to reach shelter, compared to 5 seconds in Nahal Oz and Nativ HaSara and Be'eri. So we don't complain much, but it is difficult. It is a challenge, especially for the children who were able to emerge from the trauma of October 7 and overcome what happened and are now reliving it and facing some difficulty as a result. But the one thing that really hovers above everything and impacts the reality more than anything else is the fact that our friends Omri and Tzachi and the brave soldiers from the Nahal Oz military base, which is right next to our kibbutz, Matan, Liri, Naama, Agam, Daniela, all of them are still in the hands of Hamas. This is the most difficult issue for us, and it's the number one issue, the most urgent issue that we have to resolve.
Thanks, Amir. I'm going to come back to you to dive more into sort of the political context, but I want to turn to you, Ronnie. We spoke just after October 7th, and I will note for our viewers, Ronnie has hosted countless delegations of ours in her home on Nativ HaSara and developed deep relationships with many people in our community, and also was featured at a J Street conference together with a friend from Gaza about, I think, 12 years ago. And just after October 7th, you agreed to do an interview with us for our leadership summit that we just held shortly after. And you spoke about your experience and your family's experience in Nativ HaSara on October 7th, and also shared an incredible sense of despair and lack of hope at that moment. Now, 1 year later, I want to ask you about what pains you most about the moment that we find ourselves in today, and what hope do you have for the future? Oh, Ronnie, I just need
Ronnie,
you
I think you're on mute. אתה משתק.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Is that okay? Sorry about that. What pains me most, I think, is the feeling that I did feel before the 7th of October that we were on the right road. I felt that I had kind of chord with between myself and my friends in Gaza, and we were moving closer and closer together, building up projects, building up programs, getting more and more people join us. And then all of a sudden, everything seemed, 7th of October, everything collapsed. And I find it very difficult to make people understand. If I mention today that I have friends in Gaza, then people look at me with this, how can you say such a thing like that? And I try to say, you've got to remember that there's a big difference between not all the Palestinians are Hamas. And my granddaughter said to me, but Grandma, how do you know? And I can understand what she's talking about. I understand what she means. And whereas I could always explain what was happening, when we had the rockets and the missiles and then the balloons and the kites, then I was always saying, let's give us hope, let's give them a life, and then this won't happen, unless this will stop, they won't have time for this. But what happened on the 7th of October seemed to be that one step too far, that I couldn't explain anymore. I couldn't understand anymore. It was, and this, I felt so bad because I wanted to feel for them, and I was getting WhatsApp messages from my friends in Gaza asking me how I was. One of them even wrote, "How are you, Ronnie? Please take care. We need you." And in a way, I felt guilty about all this. And I remember even talking to Adi, and I was then to Adina, sorry, and I was then in Kfar Maccabiah, and I remember talking, and I had to move aside so that no one will hear me saying the things that I felt towards the people in Gaza, although we had experienced what we had experienced, although we had lost all our friends, although I miraculously have my family still with me. And every time I look at my daughter, I think how close I was to losing her. But I can't give up. What gives me hope? I suppose the messages like the one I mentioned before, or a message I got from Gaza when someone asked me how I was and I was too busy to answer. And a few days later, he wrote again and said, "Ronnie, I'm worried. Please let me know how you are." And I wrote back and said, I'm all right, but how are you? And then I said, "Oh, is that a silly question?" And he wrote back and said, "No, Ronnie, that's not a silly question. If you ask how I am, that gives me hope." So I suppose a message like that gives me hope too, because I know they're there. And I know people find it very difficult to understand and believe, but we cannot give up hope. If we give up hope, there's nothing to live for. And I'm going to continue on that road. I'm going to try and create more and more people and help more and more people, because I think that is the only way we can move forward. With all the doubts I have, but we've got to create hope.
Thank you, Ronnie. Just hearing you say that it gives me hope, and I know just after everything that you've been through. But I do think that people like you that have developed the relationships and have the understanding that you have continue to give people hope and to continue to underscore the need, of course, to see and understand and have empathy for others. Gil, before you have to head off, I want to turn to you for one last question, which is the message that you want to leave with us 1 year later, us here in the United States, about how we can continue. We're not able to be standing there on the streets with you and mobilizing the Israeli public always. Sometimes we get there, but how can we best support you from here?
Well, that's a good question. It's sometimes even hard to understand exactly how to be supportive even here in Israel, because the reality that we're living is so complex. But I think the most important message for people to hear about Israel, about what's going on, is to understand the fight that we as Israeli people are going through, which is very different, actually, than the fight that Israeli politicians are going through. Because the people who pay the prices for this government's, I can't even describe what they're doing to us in the last few years, and especially this year. We've been paying these prices. And the world needs to know that the people of Israel are not Israel's government. There's a difference between the two. And I believe personally that innocent people on both sides of the border do not want this war to go on. They don't want this cycle of violence to go on and on and on. That's not how you build life for people on both sides of the border. I think many people in Israel, more than you think, understand it. And I have to believe that people on the other side understand it as well. And I think that's exactly why we need your voice to be heard in the United States. So people who shape reality in the United States can act, and they must act in order to get a deal that will bring the hostages back and put an end to this horrible war that we're on. Because if we don't do what's necessary, we know that we have elections in the United States in a few weeks. But after that, if we don't do what's necessary to end this war, we might have an actual war that goes forever. I think that's the plan right now. Just like we've been managing the conflict for a few years right now, what the plan is, Netanyahu's plan and other people's plan, is to just manage a war that will go on and on. And the United States and many other governments of the world, the people of the world, are actually obligated to act, because what's going on in Gaza, what Hamas is doing to the hostages, and many of the other things that are happening in the region are crimes against humanity. And that means that if we let them go on, we're partners in crime. That's why we all have to act. And that's why we all have to share our views. Don't worry to be seen as harsh critics of Netanyahu. But remember, that doesn't mean that you're harsh critics of Israel. That doesn't mean that you're going against the Israeli interest. Being pro-Israel right now is not being pro-Netanyahu. It's being pro-deal. And it's pro the lives of the innocent people on both sides of the border. Remember that. Remember that you're right about that, and that you have every right to express your opinion, because you're on the right side of history. And I see this, I said this many times, I see the conflict that we're in, it's not Israelis against Palestinians, and it's not Jews against Muslims. What we're seeing is a conflict between the people who believe in life and believe that life is a sacred thing, and on the other side, there are people who actually believe in death and can believe that death is a sacred thing, and that you can sacrifice lives of people in order to achieve other goals that are not human lives. And unfortunately, and some of us knew that before, some of us have learned this right now, there are people on both sides that believe that you can sacrifice the lives of innocent people. And that's exactly the way of thought that we want, that we need to end. And if you're on the side of life in this specific conflict between life and death, you can be sure that you're on the right side, and don't be afraid to be critical.
Thank you, Gil. We so identify with all of those messages and appreciate you emphasizing that, and of course appreciate all of your work and your activism, and thank you for being with us. One of the key messengers that we have here in English is actually you, Amir. Your pieces and your analysis, sharing those types of messages about how to stand with the Israeli people and what really are the strategic failures that have brought us here. And you did mention a little bit about your reflection on what you would say, on October 8th, where would we be? And I know that you wrote an article actually in Haaretz just about 2 days ago on this topic, and you spoke about the failure to achieve two of the war's main objectives, that you noted, returning the hostages and replacing Hamas's rule in Gaza. So I want to ask you, from a political analyst perspective, how did we find ourselves here a year later with these strategic failures? And what is the role of the United States right now to help us get back on track?
Those are two very important questions. And I think that looking back, obviously October 7 was the worst day in Israeli history, a day of humiliation, a day of total collapse. But October 8th was also a very important day, because on that day, Netanyahu rejected an offer by the leaders of the opposition party. I'm not talking about all the parties on the opposition, but the three main parties within the opposition, the party of Yair Lapid, the party of Benny Gantz, and the party of Avigdor Lieberman, to join an emergency national unity coalition with him, but in return have him sideline the far-right elements of his own existing government, the parties of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. And Netanyahu said, I'm happy to have anyone join, but I'm not sidelining Ben-Gvir and Smotrich because I will rely on them in the future to remain in power. And that's the day that wrote the rest of the story. Because for a year now, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have been, if not fully dictating the policy, then heavily influencing it. They are against a hostage deal. They were also against the first deal in November, which brought us back 100 hostages alive, almost all of them women and children. Every time you see one of these living miracles, 3-year-old Avigai Lidan, 8-year-old Ella from my kibbutz, and her 15-year-old sister, Dafna, every time you see that, remember that Ben-Gvir and Smotrich were even against that deal, and were not very far from torpedoing it. Gantz and Eisenkot, who had joined the government despite the other gentlemen's presence in it, helped pass it along. But if it wasn't for them, that deal wouldn't have happened either. And after that deal, they have been strongly against any other deal ever since. They also oppose any diplomatic solution to the situation in Gaza. They have been against any plan that would create an alternative government to Hamas, because their long-term vision is to create Israeli settlements and control Gaza forever. And once that's your plan, this dictates the policy. Netanyahu has not officially adopted this plan, but in essence, he's also not doing anything to stop it. And as a result, we are stuck without a hostage deal, without an alternative government to Hamas, and with an endless war of attrition on all fronts. So this is my big analysis. And I do think, had we seen Netanyahu just for once in his life put the country's well-being on a higher level than his own political survival, we could have had that government with the more centrist-oriented parties, without the messianic elements, and we could have had today all the hostages back home and an alternative to Hamas in Gaza. Sadly, we don't have either.
And before I turn back to Roni, in terms of the role of the United States
Yes.
at the critical juncture?
Yeah, so I think in the early months of the war, Biden saved Israel when he told the Iranians to think twice and think very hard about joining the party. Israel was at its weakest in the early weeks of the war. And if Iran and Hezbollah had decided back then to join all in, we would have been in a terrible, perhaps even existential danger. And Biden deserves a lot of credit from stopping that from happening. And of course, he deserves a lot of credit for the November deal. I think he also deserves a lot of criticism for allowing the war to reach the current stalemate and the current dead-end situation. I think that the administration, and we will see more of that history begin to come out, but the administration had good reasons to keep supporting Israel, had good reasons to want to show that there is no wedge between Israel and the United States, because we have to remember the people we're dealing with here on the other side. They would anticipate that and see that as a sign of weakness. But there were also opportunities to push harder for a deal and to apply more pressure that were not used. And I think on that question, there will certainly be a lot of criticism. But I have to say, people in the United States who, out of anger over Biden's mistakes, are planning to boycott the election are Netanyahu's useful idiots. I mean, you know, these people that you see saying, oh, because of Biden's failures, so now it doesn't matter who's going to be the president. This is just, I mean, Netanyahu needs to send them a Rosh Hashanah package, basically, you know, thank you note. Because for him, entering 2025 with Trump in the White House would be the best scenario possible. I think it would lead to even further deterioration in terms of the never-ending aspects of the war. And I'm truly puzzled. I'm not an American citizen. I don't vote in your elections. But I'm truly puzzled by these people. I think it's one of the, truly suicidal sense of policy.
We very much agree with that, and of course are very active in trying to do everything possible to ensure that Kamala ends up in the White House, and of course also understanding, you know, the engagement that is necessary to continue to push and craft actually constructive policy in the Middle East. But the stakes are so high, and the alternative, you know, looking back a year later and thinking of what would be a reality a year from now with Trump in the White House would be a disaster for the region and also, of course, for the United States. Thank you, Amir. Ronnie, for the last question for this panel, I wanted to note, many people know also here that you are very close friends with Vivian Silver, who is someone else in our community that we have very much looked up to over the years, and she was tragically murdered on October 7th. The work that you and Vivian led together have been an inspiration to many of us here over decades. And at times of such despair and with the stakes so high, how can we keep her legacy alive and, of course, continue to support your vision that you just spoke about and your peaceful vision for the future?
Yes, I miss Vivian awfully. I remember even the week before the 7th of October, we were both on a panel and hosted a group of women from the States and from Europe and from Morocco. And we both spoke to them and told them our vision of how we see the future here and what we see in the future here, and the possibility of living in peace, either side by side with a Palestinian state or together in one state in some form or other. And then I remember the 7th of October. We've called one another to make sure how we were and what was happening. And I said that my daughter had terrorists in her house. And then she said, I've got terrorists in my house. Don't call me again. And that was the last I heard from her. The only way to keep her legacy alive, really, I think, is to pick ourselves up and continue on the road to peace. Vivian's two sons, with all the pain and all the heartache, are doing exactly that. And I think we should follow suit. And I'm trying to. It's not easy. But I think that she shed a light that really, I mean, whenever I have my doubts, I just think of sitting next to Vivian and talking about it, and I know how the discussion will end, and I know it means there is no other way. We have no choice. We can't go on killing one another until there's no one left. to pick up the pieces. We've got to create hope for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren. If we want to stay and live here, and happily and safely, however it seems impossible at this very moment, we must create a hope to continue. And when I meet more and more people from the other side who think really very much the same way, they'll talk about it very much under the radar, but I know they're there. And we've got to give them the strength. And that's what we tried to do before. Make them feel strong enough to stand up for their ideas and not let the radicals lead our life, because we're both doing that at the moment. I must admit that whenever I feel really low and feel almost like there's no hope and despair, I think of Vivian and I see her smile, and I know that we can go on. Not we can, we must.
We must. And I think what you just noted about, the extremists really dictating our reality, I think picks up perfectly on what Amir was saying in terms of how did we get here, and the dominance that extremists, the role that they're playing in Israel, in Israeli politics right now. And of course, also, we've seen the result of that in Palestinian politics, as well as also in Lebanon. And I think that I really appreciate your message continuing to empower us, the pragmatic folks that are working towards a reality of peace and to stop this endless suffering. And I thank you both, Roni and Amir, for being with us here as part of this first panel. And I want to transition now to the second panel of our webinar today. And the focus, I think, picks up very nicely on Roni's last comments, because Avi Dabush and Racheli Geffen are two activists that are really working to continue to help shape the reality, Roni, that you just spoke about, and to do the difficult work at the very difficult times, and to continue working towards that vision that you just laid out. And I will briefly introduce them. Avi Dabush is the executive director of Rabbis for Human Rights and a survivor of the October 7th attack on Kibbutz Nirim. He is fiercely committed to the survival of Israeli democracy and to a Jewish state that is moral and upholds the essential tenets of the Jewish tradition. And Racheli Geffen is the communications director of Have You Seen the Horizon Lately, which is an Israeli NGO promoting Jewish-Arab political partnership after almost a decade in the United States, where she earned her master's in political communications at Johns Hopkins and served also as a digital director and then deputy spokesperson at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. She returned to Israel and her activism and advocacy. So Avi and Racheli, thank you for being with us today. Avi, I will pose the first question to you. As a survivor from Kibbutz Nirim on the border of Gaza, where 9 people were killed and 7 people were taken hostage, I'd like to ask you to just share your story, your October 7th story with us, and how you found the strength and resilience to continue your activism and what your activism looks like today.
Thank you, Adina, and thank you all. And I believe that my friends, Gil and Amir and Roni, answered the second question. I will say briefly that we were in Nirim that morning after we had the anniversary of the kibbutz night before. So most of the people of Nirim and also visitors were in that day and morning in Kibbutz Nirim. Kibbutz Nirim is less than 2 kilometers from Khan Yunis, so it's the first place that the terrorists, the Hamas soldiers, get into in our area. And that was, I won't go into details, but in some way it also helped a lot of us to not go into a severe scenario like our friends in Nir Oz. It's 500 meters from us, Kibbutz Nir Oz. So it started, as you know, around 6:30 in the morning. After 5 minutes, the terrorist was inside. We started this very long day. For 8 hours. We just prayed for army to come. We had several, and it was like by chance, soldiers that were there and helicopters, and then our people, like the people with guns, that really helped most of us to survive those 8 hours. After 8 hours, the army came into our houses and cleared all the area and got us again into the shelters. Around 4 in the afternoon on Sunday, on October 8th, we were evacuated under fire, and there were still battles inside the kibbutz and on the fence to Eilat. We were in Eilat 4 months in the same hotel, all the community, and then we moved ourselves into Beersheba. Right now, we are one of 10 places that still can't go back. I'm not talking about the north. Now it's more severe in the north in those terms of this place, but we are one of the places in the Western Negev that we can't go back. And I guess there is a lot of things that helped me in that, maybe changing my roadmap, but not my values, and even feel more stronger in those values. But the basic fact is, like those friends of mine and partners said, that this is the only way for us. I really believe that we will find a way someday to live together, Palestinians and Zionists, Arabs and Jews, and from the river to the sea. The only question, of course, is how much blood and how much time will be till we get to this target. And this is the question of leadership, of course. We must have, and right now, unfortunately, we don't. We must have leadership that will find a way to bring this future, and not after we will be so beaten up. Again, Palestinians and Zionists, Arabs and Jews, that we will like crawl into this future. So this is my belief, and also, I guess, my mission. And I want to believe that this should be the mission of all my beloved country. I feel myself as a Zionist, as a patriot. I'm not by chance. I'm there in the Negev, and specifically in Nirim and on the border of Gaza. I used to live in Sderot, in Ashkelon. I grew up in Ashkelon, and after that in Bor Chai, another kibbutz. So I really believe that this is the only way for us to flourish, to have a sustainable Israel.
Thank you, Avi. Racheli, in the aftermath of the October 7th massacre, your organization, Have You Seen the Horizon Lately, established the first joint Jewish-Arab emergency relief center in the Bedouin city of Raat. Your team also focused, right after October 7th, on highlighting incredible stories of survival and Jewish-Arab partnership that took place on October 7th. Some of the most moving videos that I saw after October 7th. Can you share some of those remarkable moments of Jewish-Arab-Palestinian partnership post-October 7th and some of the success highlights from that emergency relief center?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much. Honored to be here. And as our mission, our stated mission on regular days is to promote a Jewish-Arab political partnership. Just, even if you don't care about morality, but just in the sense of numbers, there's no other way for us to get to the future that we want, which is a democratic, liberal Israel, two-state solution. We have to join forces with our natural partners. And one of the main ways that we see this mission is to somehow, we're reaching out to the mainstream Jewish community, right? We're not like trying to send a message to the Arab community. They have their leaders. I don't want to mansplain them what they should do, but our mission is to create and magnify and establish some legitimacy, political legitimacy to the Arab community, so they can be seen as equal natural partners at the decision table. So usually what we do, our main tool is, public campaigns and protests and things like that. And on October 7th, after spending a couple of days in shock, doom scrolling like everybody else, just by, I think the way everybody else functioned with like calls to friends, are you okay? We reached out to friends and partners in the Bedouin community and realized they have nothing. Like while people were donating and sending stuff. And we tried to do it at the beginning in the first few days. It was very small. We sent a couple of trucks down from the Brothers in Arms Relief Center, and Bedouin women drivers from the unrecognized villages just packed their private cars and drove all the like humanitarian aid into the villages. It later turned into something so massive, but I have to say that the most moving thing, I don't know if the most, but I guess that moment when it just happened for the first time, I think was the first time I felt hope, or I don't know, less hopeless and less helpless. And then, yeah, kind of naturally, a couple of days later, it became a huge operation. And I think the most moving, I don't want to say what was the most, but I will say that there are like a couple of aspects, because on the most human basic level, the face-to-face meeting people, we were working at the center, and we were not trying to solve the problems, and we were just working together, shoulder to shoulder, packing rice, talking logistics, but it just was so, I don't want to say normal, but it was like this is how it's meant to be. And it's just, so that meeting, those little interactions when a Jewish guy who came all the way from Tel Aviv to volunteer, initially like was too scared to get into the unrecognized villages in the Negev because they don't have protection. They don't have Iron Dome, they don't have shelters. And that moment that he kind of realized that if they live there, then he might as well go, and he was welcomed so like warmly. There was a group of Arab guys. Sorry, I suddenly forgot the word guys. We had the guys, most of the relief center was women, but we did need somebody to like carry packages. And some of those men came to Sderot to deliver the food, and a bunch of very Jewish men accepted them. And everybody was like happy that there's food and it's delivered and we're doing it. I think, yeah, we came to Bet Chabad in Ofakim to distribute food, and a sheikh from Rahat joined us and just it was so natural, it was so nice, and yet so unimaginable in that moment when fear and suspicion were so at such high level. So that's the first level, the emotional kind of personal level. But as I said, we're not like a grassroots organization. We do campaigns, and in many ways, on October 7th, campaigns were not made on billboards. They were made on relief centers. So on the first day, we were so worried. We didn't even invite any like media or anything. We're just like, we don't know if it's going to work. And within a week, every major news channel, local, global, there was media. New York Times was there, CNN came, all over the world. And that was like kind of the bigger message, right? We're not just packing rice. We're trying to send over a huge message that this is, as I think Gil said just a second ago, this is not a war between Jews and Arabs, right? This is a war between merchants of death and people who want to live. And those images, the fact that we were able to kind of create this huge ripple effect of that hopeful feeling that we had inside the center and kind of reached out to many more. The reactions from people coming and from media were kind of just strengthening that message to us. And we're right. People need that. People need to see that. She always tells about an interview that was published in Haaretz just a few days after the massacre, where a psychologist that specializes in like post-trauma, and he said that the main problem with crimes against humanity is that they make you lose faith in humanity, and the only cure for that is to be exposed immediately to doses of humanity. And that was kind of what we were trying to do, and it was amazing to see. And on the final level, which is the political level at the end, in no time, political figures started arriving. First was Minister Gantz. At the time he was a minister, he just entered the war cabinet. That was his first public appearance after joining the government. And he stressed out that it is important to him because maintaining that fragile, delicate fabric of our like joint life together is crucial to our resilience, to our survivor. And then the president came, and Minister Mergi and Minister Arbel, both of whom are from Shas, the ultra-Orthodox party. And we kind of didn't allow politicians who are into who are trying to divide us, the racist ones. We didn't allow anybody to come in and like, you know, have a photo op and go away, but the people who came engaged with the community and kind of publicly speak out and send that message of partnership. It was super important for us because that, again, political partnership is the main goal that we're trying to strive for. So I guess, yeah, I don't know. Everything it was a moving time. It was, I hate to say it, it was hard to say initially that it was nice. It was kind of fun to be there. It was a place to breathe.
Yeah. I imagine what you said about being able to be together and sort of be reminded of the humanity in that moment where, you know, it seems so difficult to see the humanity in one another is that, like, we're specifically, you know, from different backgrounds between Jews and Arabs and Palestinians was so challenging. So thank you, Racheli, for outlining that on the various levels. And Avia, I want to turn back to you to ask you about the work of Rabbis for Human Rights post October 7th. And what was the focus after October 7th, and what was it like to engage Israelis in your work, and also the reality for Palestinians in the West Bank? How did that impact your activities post October 7th?
Yeah, so actually we understood very quickly that we have a very big mission and we have to do much more than we did before October 7th. Racheli talked about the shock, and of course I was in a lot, after we suffered so many people, friends and family and so on that murdered and kidnapped and so on, and others were in a war situation, but we decided that we have, this is the time that we were established for. And we started actually with humanitarian work, like the story of Racheli, because our partner said, right now we need medical aid and food. The farmers in Nablus area, the shepherds in the Jordan Valley, in the west, in the East Hebron Hills, and in East Jerusalem and so on. So we started with that. We are not humanitarian organization, we are a human rights organization, but we understood that this is the time that we need to do what it's needed. So we did it for many months, and the highlights was in Ramadan. We created a coalition of 17 organizations working towards that. Actually, we had in Hanukkah in December, we had an event in Rahat with your organization, Racheli, with many sheikhs and rabbis and others that came and prayed and talked about it, but also did this activism in order to help also the unrecognized villages. We also got stronger in the field because we understood that we need to do more of a protective presence, again, with the shepherds, the farmers, and the villages and the communities. In the first, it's still like that, but in the first days and weeks, they suffered so much from attacks from what we call Jewish terrorists, usually settlers, that came, and even a lot of people in the first month lost their life in those attacks. So we did much more, and right now we have coordinators in each part of the West Bank, trying to bring more and more volunteers. Actually, we are only in this Thursday, we are in the beginning of the biggest project of the Olive Harvest campaign. We don't really know. It's like this situation, it's a situation that all of us weren't in this situation. It's the most bloodiest time in the history of the conflict, but we understand that we need to do more. And another example for that is also the interfaith work that became much stronger in Rabbis for Human Rights. And it's really interesting because I was in Tokyo, in Australia, and of course talking a lot with US, with American friends, and a lot of them are saying that all the interfaith work and project collapsed from October 7th, and it's very hard, especially with Muslim friends. But in Israel, our experience is the opposite, that our partners and we, of course, understand that we must do more, and this is the way. And it's not really easy a lot of time, and it's not that we are thinking in the same way. Of course, when we are talking, we have, for example, Sabil, it's a Palestinian Christian organization. And of course, they are not in line with what I feel. And of course, in our organization also, there are Palestinians and Zionists and Jews and Arabs and so on. But it's more important to have this partnership because in the end, we all believe and trying to push to human rights. And in that sense, we really believe in the human rights of the people in Gaza, of course, and in the people in Israel, in the West Bank and South Lebanon and so on. So those kind of examples that we had to push ourselves to do more. I want only to add the philosophy. We understand, of course, we were in the midst of that, and we are still about the physical war. You know, we have to survive. We have to fight for our security, the security of others. It all understood, and also a basic human right. But I'm really concerned about the war on our values, because right now in Israel, it's really hard to talk about what is happening to the children of Gaza. I'm not talking about other people in Gaza or in other places. And I'm really worried about the values, my values, you know, as a new rabbi, as a CEO of a rabbi's organization, as one that really I admire the culture, the Jewish culture that brought so many ideas of this obligation for other people. And right now, it's also in a danger, in a real danger. And for us, it's also a way to have actions, because we can talk a lot, and there is so many tokens. But those kind of action to go to the West Bank each day with a lot of people, with a lot of volunteers, with rabbis that raise their voice, it is really important for us also as kind of a fight against the Jewish supremacy ideas, the violence of ideas of only power can make a change. And this is what we are trying to do, of course.
Thank you, Avi, and definitely resonates with us that fight to uphold our values and the fight for the soul, essentially, and the work that people say the soul of the country, the soul of the Jewish people, and that's something that I hope that you do see us here in North America as your partners to support that fight for those values. Racheli, one last question for you before we close. I have to acknowledge, of course, the challenge to do the work that both of you are doing, and also we find ourselves here a year later, and unfortunately, it's just days after there was actually an attack in Beersheba, where the shooter in that attack was an Israeli citizen from a Bedouin village in the Negev, and at moments like that, right, all of the work that both of you are doing, right, to try and to combat those stigmas, it becomes even more challenging. And so I'd love for you to be able to leave us with some words of optimism in terms of how do you take moments like that and turn them into an opportunity? How do you address those moments and head on to advance the work that you are trying to do?
Well, first I gotta say that the Arab leadership in Israel is making it pretty easy for us, because the way that they have continuously since October 7th and including right now after Beersheba, the way they immediately condemn this and kind of unequivocally, they always have unequivocal statements that are just exactly what we want to hear when violence happens. I wish I would have heard even like half of it from Jewish leaders when Jewish violence happens. But I think the same way October 7th I think was a main, not a main, but an extreme example for the fact that we are partners in fate in this country, right? No one's going anywhere. We are all here, and we kind of have the same future in a way. And the same way, Hamas didn't differentiate between Jews and Arabs, and the rockets definitely don't do that. And all the stories that you mentioned that we shared at the time, the videos, bravery, and grace, of people who just ran into the fire to rescue other people. Nobody asked one another, what do you believe in and who do you vote for? Just something so deep, human. And to us, that was the hidden kind of, I don't know how to say it, opportunity in that dark, dark moment. And it continues over and over again. I can't stop terrorists, of course. And as you mentioned, what we do, at least in our organization, is a lot of like public perception. And the same way we tried to kind of flood the airwaves with images of Jews and Arabs working together, and Arabs helping rescuing Jews, mostly like around October 7th. We kind of have to keep continuing to do that. Like, for example, right now, LAPAM, which is the, what do you call them, GPO, the government press office. They did a video about like 1 year since October 7th, and they wanted to show the joint center as well. Obviously it had to be Shir, our CEO, and obviously our partners. And it was the only Arab person that was in that video. Not perfect. A lot of people said we shouldn't, but I think it's better to show it anywhere we can. So, and I think yesterday, I don't know if any of you watched the family's ceremony. It was the most optimistic and heartbreaking thing I've ever seen. And for a second, it was representation on stage of Israel, of Israelis, the way we really are. And I can't think of any other way to fight the stigma than to keep on like more representation, to hear more voices, to make them heard. For our, again, we reach out, we are trying to reach the Jewish mainstream, and for them to hear over and over again that, again, we're all in this together. This is not the enemy at all. We suffer the same losses. We fight together. We try to fight together and to build something together. And again, I just kind of, you know what, there's no need to repeat on it. Everything, all the correct things that people said before me. If I need to end with optimism, I would say we're at a crossroad and we're gonna have to make a decision. We are gonna have to start making choices, and this is our opportunity to change this course that we've been on for the past, who knows how many decades.
Thank you, Racheli, and thank you, Avi, for your work and for those words, because it is so important to continue doing this. We spoke briefly in this conversation about the power of extremists to influence the public discourse, and it's so important to have the work that you are doing influencing the public discourse, because every person, it does create an impact, and we hope that impact will spread to be able to support what we know is the necessary political future, which is Israelis and Palestinians living side by side, both with independence and autonomy and security and safety. And it's hard to say that 1 year where we find ourselves still in the midst of war, but I think even more so, this conversation, I hope for all of our viewers, has underscored the importance of not giving up hope, even in our darkest hour. And even though we find ourselves a year later still grieving and in pain, that it is the responsibility of all of us to continue to engage. I also want to made a point of clarification on something that I said earlier. I had mentioned earlier that we are doing everything that we can to support the Harris campaign, and I want to be very specific because this is a webinar that's not only on behalf of J Street, it's also the Progressive Israel Network. I was speaking specifically on behalf of J Street, that does have a political action committee that does endorse Kamala Harris, and not all of the PIN groups are in that capacity. So I just wanted to note that specific point of clarification, and also to note my colleague Nate has put into the chat that we do have, as I mentioned at the top of the call, another webinar that we will be diving into the impact of October 7th on Palestinians in the wider Middle East, which will be taking place on Thursday, October 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern. And again, thank you to everyone who joined us, to our speakers, and wishing you all a meaningful rest of the day. And I know that it's very late also in Israel, so thank you for joining us at such a late hour and staying with us. And we will meet again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Alvai. Amen.
Amen.